Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Poly Talks, and this will be perhaps one of the largest analysis videos of the year because this is my first video post the 2022 midterm elections. Now, when I say post 2022 midterm elections, I mean that November 8th has come and gone. I do not mean these elections are over because, contrary to what most pundits were predicting prior to the election, as you can see by the CNN graphic here, these races are very much not over, and that should come as a huge warning sign for the Republican Party. But when you're looking deeper, this is actually very poor news for the Republican Party. Now, coming into this election, we had an interesting environment because a few weeks prior to that, in sort of early October, Democrats actually had a surge in polls and they were doing better and they were outperforming national expectations. And that was largely due to a culmination of factors ranging from Democrats passing new legislation, the economy. It looked like there would be a brief downturn from the economic. A brief surge from the economic downturn. And it was really, things were looking up for Democrats, and voters were starting to believe that they would be the party that is most trusted in Congress, and that was reflected in opinion polling, which showed the Democrats narrowly ahead. But then in the weeks coming to the election, the honeymoon period of this new legislation wore off to some extent. The economy was getting worse and worse by the minute. OPEC had recently announced oil cuts, and all of this was expected to result in a Democratic blowout in the midterms, which is consistent with almost every single midterm we've seen in history. The most recent exception being 2002, and then beyond that, 1998, which was still not a great result for the Democratic Party. And then beyond that, the last major success in the midterm for any political party was the midterms when FDR was president, when one of the most popular presidents at the time had recently signed in a sweeping economic policy and helped the U.S. recover from World War II. And in 1998, it was actually a strange case. I think the Democratic success was largely due to first of all, the already huge Republican majorities from the Revolution of 1994, etc., but then also the unpopularity of attempts to impeach Bill Clinton, which is seen as a political stunt by Republicans, and in retrospect, probably a poor political decision. However, in 2002, this was spurred by a major event, and that was the 9/11 terrorist attack, in which the country rallied around George Bush as this figure who could unite the country after this devastating attack. And in 2022, the closest equivalent of that is the Roe versus Wade decision, which, as I've said previously, will have somewhat of an impact on these elections. Don't quote me on this, but if Roe v. Wade had not been issued by the Supreme Court, then I do believe that Democrats would have been wiped out in these midterms. I think it did have a larger effect than maybe people were expecting and helped encourage Democratic turnout. Because keep in mind, the main reason a lot of presidents experience scathing midterms is because of poor turnout on the party, determined by economic factors, etc. And this election, we did not have it. We actually had one of the largest turnouts of any midterm election, if not the largest turnout. And that turnout typically, but not always, means good things for Democrats in terms of how they perform electorally. Now, just to go into a little more detail, I want to compare the midterms with my predictions. Now, this is my Senate prediction. This is simply the races I expected without the lean tilt characterizations, etc. But as you can see here, I did expect the Democratic Party to lose Nevada and lose Pennsylvania, and I did expect them to lose the Senate majority, 51-49. But now it's looking, although we have a runoff election in Georgia, which I'll get to, but it's looking right now, Pennsylvania has been called. This one's going to John Fetterman. So evidently the debate recently did not have a major negative effect on Fetterman. And in Nevada and Arizona, neither have been called, but they both look pretty likely to go to Democrats at this point. And then assuming Georgia goes blue in the runoff, which I think there's also a very great possibility, then the Senate would be 51-49, even if it goes red, or one of these races goes red between Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, then the Democrats still retain the Senate majority exactly as it stands now. And as for the House majority, it is still expected to go to the Republican Party, but it's actually not a sure thing. Now, as of right now, Democrats only have 9 fewer seats than Republicans. There is a theoretical route for Democrats to retain the House majority. Do not quote me as saying that is the most likely outcome, but it is certainly a narrow possibility at this point, which it shouldn't, 3 days after the election. That should not be a possibility at this point. So we have, through these analyses of races, we see a very poor result for the Republican Party. Now, Kevin McCarthy or Republican leaders may try and spin this as a great result, but the Republican Party knows it's not. Not because the results in an isolated space aren't a good result. They are. I mean, it's not like the Democrats had substantial seat gains in either chamber, and they are likely, as of this point, to lose control of the House, but just due to the sheer underperformance of what is expected and what is on par with history. In 2010, Democrats lost 63 net seats in the House, and I believe 7 net seats in the Senate. And in 2014, because the Republican majority was already so large, Republicans only gained 12 seats, still the highest House majority for years. And then Democrats lost 9 seats in the Senate. 9 seats. And of course, due to polarization and kind of the split this division of this country in recent years, you can see why it's not quite as drastic as that, especially because the Democrats didn't exactly achieve large majorities in 2020, although still the Republicans should have done more. Republicans should certainly have flipped Nevada and Arizona and Georgia, if we're assuming a best case scenario for Republicans, which was entirely within reach on election day. They should have won Pennsylvania. That one was actually expected by many people to go to Republicans. And in addition to winning Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, Republicans also should have won New Hampshire in a best case scenario. And New Hampshire is a state which initially was seen as possibly one of Democrats' biggest potential losses because of the fact that Governor Chris Sununu could have ran in that race. However, that was entirely contingent, of course, on Governor Sununu winning, or running, actually, even, and he did not. So Republicans instead nominated Don Bolduc, a very poor candidate for the relatively moderate New Hampshire, and Democrats actually ended up winning here quite comfortably, and that was one of the first competitive Senate races called on Election Day. This is not to say Republicans had a completely poor night. They did win in Ohio, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, 3 seats seen as competitive coming into the cycle. However, they still fell short in many of the key races, and that illustrates a fundamental problem with Republicans and their messaging, which I will briefly address at the end of this video. In the meantime, I want to talk about the House results. Now, we can see in the House here that while Republicans also made many flips, Democrats also flipped some seats, including Steve Chabot's seat in Ohio, which was a Republican incumbent. And this is actually, on that metric alone, a better performance for Democrats than in 2020, because in 2020, Democrats did not flip any House seats with incumbent Republicans. So already Democrats are doing better on that front. And one of the biggest shocks of this election cycle was this race, Colorado's 3rd district. And this race looks like it's going to a recount between Lauren Boebert and Adam Frisch. Now, in Colorado's 3rd district, Republicans had a 97% chance of winning this race. And this race is likely to be decided by less than a percentage point. 97%. And another shocking race is in Washington. This race here, Mary Gluesenkamp-Perez had a 2% chance of winning here, but she's currently leading and could very possibly win this seat. Now, this picture illustrates a fundamentally poor result for the GOP, no matter which way you slice it. You cannot say this was a quote-unquote good result for the GOP. Even if they win the House, you couldn't say if in 2008 the Democrats won a 51-seat Senate majority, you could not say that was a good result for Democrats, because as we saw, one of the possible results there involved them retaining a 59-seat majority in the Senate. So it's important to think about the context here when we're thinking about how good a result is for a political party. And in terms of how this midterm election contrasted with expectations, 84% chance Republicans win, 60%, nearly 60% chance Republicans win the Senate. They are on track to lose the Senate so far, and I'll show you the betting markets too, because that can be helpful. 95% Arizona, 95% Nevada. People here are very confident that Democrats will win these seats, and even in Georgia too, because while Georgia is going to a runoff, Herschel Walker honestly lacks a lot of enthusiasm, and I think Raphael Warnock is simply a more appealing and enthusiastic candidate than Herschel Walker, who voters really don't want to get up on a December morning and wait in polls for minutes or even hours on end to vote for Herschel Walker. But that cannot be said about Raphael Warnock. So that race could very possibly go to Raphael Warnock, although it's not impossible that it will be clinched by Herschel Walker. And then, look at this. Which party will win the House in 2022? Democrats are nearly at 30 cents. That's more than that. And at one point, well, yes, they are actually at their highest point now that they have been. And this is shocking, because we really did not see any possibility that the House could go to Democrats. So frankly, I am very surprised by these election results, and I just want to address at this point why we are seeing such a reversal of expectations this election. And I have one word: Trump. Trump was simply detrimental to Republicans this year. Now, that can't be said about primary elections. Trump was very successful in primary elections. Practically all the Republicans he endorsed did win their respective primaries, even when they were running against an incumbent. Case in point, a district in Michigan, you can see here, Hillary Schulten versus John Gibbs in Michigan's 3rd district. Now, this was a race where John Gibbs, the Republican, actually had a successful primary campaign against the incumbent Republican who voted to impeach Trump. And the Democrats won this race. This same story, can be seen over and over and over in the cycle. New Hampshire congressional races, governor's races, Maryland and Massachusetts both went to Democrats overwhelmingly. And Maryland, the Republican candidate, was extremely pro-Trump. So what we're seeing here is Trump was absolutely detrimental to Republicans this cycle. And further evidence of this is the contrast is that in Florida seems to be the sole state that actually did have a red wave year this election cycle. Now, Republicans flipped 3 House districts, largely due to redistricting, and they won the Senate race by over 15 points, and the governor's race by practically around 20%. That, if we were just looking at Florida, this election would be a massive red wave, and I have to say, after these election results, I would not classify Florida as a swing state anymore. But, moving on to the larger picture, Florida, both of the candidates there were similar to Trump in that they had charisma, a certain electability, electability is not the correct word, but they could rally their base, but without all the extra baggage and unpopularity attached. Ron DeSantis is one of the strongest candidates, and he will have, I can say with certainty at this point, if he ran in a 2024 presidential election, he would have much better chances than if Trump was the nominee. So the message for the GOP in this election cycle, this is a desperate warning. They need to get rid of Trump. They, for 2 years now since Trump's defeat in 2020, they have clung on to him and they've refused to let him go. And we saw in the runoffs how detrimental Trump could be. We saw in this election how detrimental Trump could be. I don't understand why Republicans aren't learning this lesson, is that Trump is bad for the party. He is not helping. The only people he is helping is Democrats and Republicans in competitive primary elections, but most of them end up losing the general election in November. So that's clearly not a win. So the message for this cycle is Republicans need to get rid of Trump, and we've seen a rebuke of, I wouldn't say the Republican Party as a whole, but simply that Trumpian aspect, because we have some more moderate Republicans winning so far, and this is simply a dire result that shows that the Republican Party needs to move away from Trump, and this is a very poor result for Republicans, and I will make an update in a few days when we may know House or Senate control, although that is certainly not a given. And then after that, I will make a video analyzing the impacts of these elections on the environment. So stay tuned, and I will see you next time. Polytalks out.